My name is Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Bible, and I will be facilitating this virtual IA Symposium. We are excited to have you here with us today and look forward to sharing with you some of our program updates and would like to hear from you ideas about individual assistance. I will transition to Emily Rogers, who will go over some logistical information.
Hello, my name is Emily Rogers, and I will be assisting Jennifer in facilitating this virtual symposium. Before we begin, I would like to share some information to help make for a smoother symposium experience. And please forgive my reading, but there are numerous details, and I want to make sure I get it right. This symposium is being interpreted into American Sign Language and will be captioned in English. Therefore, you will see an interpreter on the screen with the symposium presenter. If you require closed captioning, please click the closed captioning icon and enable captioning. As a result of the interpretation and captioning, please expect the speakers to pause during the remarks, presentation, and the transitions between speakers to allow our interpreters and captioners adequate time to rotate during the symposium. To ensure all features of today's symposium are accessible, we recommend using a laptop. All participants will be muted and will have video disabled. We will not be able to unmute any participants during this webinar. Please use the question and answer box to submit additional questions for the facilitated question and answer portion of the webinar. If you experience any technical issues during the webinar, please send a message in the questions box, and one of our technical support specialists will work with you directly to help troubleshoot the problem. This webinar will be recorded and posted online at a later date. The link to this recording will be sent to all registrants once it is posted. The recordings from the January and March IA symposiums have been posted on the FEMA YouTube channel. The links to these recordings will be shared in the chat. Throughout the symposium, we welcome your questions and comments. Please use the question and answer box to ask questions to our presenters. Questions that are not answered during today's symposium will be answered after the webinar and sent out to registrants at a later date. If you'd prefer to communicate with FEMA's Individual Assistance Division outside of the question and answer box, we invite you to email us directly. Our staff will drop the email address in the chat now. Today's agenda, presentation, and other materials will be uploaded to the chat. To view the materials, please select the link and download the material. I'll now turn it back to Jennifer for some welcoming remarks.
Thanks, Emily. I just wanted to call attention to one handout that you'll be receiving in the chat, and that is about data sharing agreements. So we were unfortunately not able to have a speaker on that today, but they were able to provide information regarding data sharing agreements and data that is accessible to the public like yourself that may be helpful in disaster planning and recovery. I also want to reiterate what Emily just said, that the webinars are available on FEMA.gov. And with that, I will turn it over to Emily so that we can talk or hear from our first speaker. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Jennifer. I am pleased to introduce Rebecca Kennedy to provide information on disaster case management. Rebecca, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here with you all today. As Emily and Jennifer mentioned, my name is Rebecca Kennedy. I'm a team lead for the Community Services section at FEMA headquarters, and today we'll be talking about disaster case management. So the purpose for today's discussion is to talk about the modern approach to applying for a disaster case management federal award. The intent behind the modern approach is to reduce the burden on the states, tribes, and territories, as well as on FEMA, and reducing those timelines to get a faster determination so that when approved, the disaster case management services can be on the ground quicker, much quicker than using the traditional approach. So here you'll see we have outlined a quick agenda for you all. We'll start with a DCM overview, just giving a quick background of the program and the authority. We'll then go into the requirements for an application. We'll talk about a timeline. So it might be something familiar, but we'll also discuss the best timeline for implementing disaster case management and why. And then we'll really get into what the modern approach is and tell you a little bit about that. And then we'll show you 3 basic elements to consider when applying for DCM using the modern approach. So first we'll talk about the disaster case management. So it is authorized, as many of you know, under Section 426 of the Stafford Act, though it is further outlined in the Individual Assistance Program and Policy Guide in the policy. So it does provide funding to states, tribes, and territories through a federal award application process. And when awarded, it does supplement the state and the local capacity to provide those case management services to individuals impacted by a disaster. The purpose of this program is to have DCM case managers connect one-on-one with survivors that may not be able to effectively and efficiently recover on their own, and to help them find specific resources that they may need to address their disaster-caused unmet needs. So there's a couple of boxes towards the bottom of this slide. And if you look on the right-hand side, we'll talk about what the application process looks like. So first, as mentioned in the Stafford Act, we do need a declaration that includes individual assistance. The state, tribe, and territory would need to assess the basic population to serve, look at what the disaster cause unmet needs are, and then see what the program would need as well. The state, tribe, or territory would need to submit a DCM application to FEMA. And you'll see here, it says within about 2 to 4 weeks post-declaration, though the official time to submit the DCM application is 90 days post-declaration. So you'll see why we're saying 2 to 4 weeks is that ideal timeline in just a minute. And then once and if FEMA approves a disaster case management program, the state, tribe, or territory would commence hiring or procuring, and then begin starting services and submit modifications as needed throughout the period of performance. On the left-hand side, you'll see we talk about procuring DCM providers. When we talk about this, we're looking, one of the big things that we like to point out is ensuring that we're procuring providers with disaster case management experience. These providers should mirror the community they serve. They might have those pre-built connections and relationships with recovery stakeholders and the resources. And they should understand how to really advocate for the individual resources. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but this is just a quick overview of the program. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what are the requirements for the application. So several things here. So first, there must be a gap in what FEMA and the SBA provide to individuals and resources, and they must have resources to address that gap. So one of the misconceptions is that DCM brings resources with it that address those disaster-caused unmet needs. But in truth, the DCM grant provides funding so that the state, tribe, or territory can hire staff and outfit staff to provide those services. The resources for those disaster-caused unmet needs should already be available so that the disaster case managers can connect survivors to the resources to address those unmet needs. But without those resources, the program doesn't work. So there should also be the ability to provide those case management services should be beyond the state and tribe or territory and local capacity to provide. And then an application is also needed with the appropriate signatures. So in this box at the bottom, you'll see that there's application requirements. So the first is the justification summary. That's the big main narrative for disaster case management. We are currently in the process of building out a new application. And part of that is we want to make sure that you all are not repeating the elements that you've already put in your disaster declaration request. So we're building these questions that you can specifically answer within a few sentences or a very short essay, but we're looking to reduce the burden and prevent you from having to write a 50-page narrative of why this program is needed in an area when you've already submitted your disaster declaration request. This document is signed by the governor or tribal chief executive or their authorized representative. The next is an itemized budget. So we'll talk about that will have every line item that's needed. and describe why it's needed. And then we have 4 standard forms. So we have the SF424. That's a 424 and the SF424B are both signed by the authorized representative of the applying entity. The 424A is that budget information, so it'll have all of the numbers listed on that. And then the SFLLL, or the lobbying forms, is typically already on file with FEMA, but if not, that it will be required to be submitted with the application as well. So here's the timeline that we were discussing. So most of you have probably seen the disaster assistance sequence of delivery in some form. So that's on the left-hand side, and we broke it down a lot here, so to give you an idea of what's going on in those days. And then on the right-hand side, we're showing you the DCM federal award process steps. So the right-hand side is more of that ideal timeline that we discussed before. So on the left, you'll see day 1 through 30, and that's just telling you what's happening in the response phase. You see the FEMA registration periods open, everything's happening in that period. At the same time that that's happening, ideally, the state, tribe, or territory is also assessing the need, completing the application, and submitting that to FEMA for determination. And day 31 through 60, you typically see disaster legal services, crisis counseling, disaster unemployment assistance, and other programs coming online. And at the same time, if the application was submitted in day 1 through 30 in that 30-day timeline, and a determination's been made, the state, tribe, or territory can begin hiring, procuring, training all of their DCM staff. In day 61 through 90, that's when you really start to see these long-term recovery groups come online. You might see those resources becoming available from philanthropic and private industries. And that's really the optimal time to implement those DCM services. It's that sweet spot from when people start getting determinations from the federal government and finding out what covers and if there were any gaps, and then having disaster case management help fill those gaps and finding those resources for them to aid in their recovery. And then finally, in day 91 and beyond, you start to see the long, you might see CDBG, DR coming available. You'll see those disaster recovery centers closing. But at that period, that's also for the disaster case management side, that's when the state, tribe, or territory would really start evaluating their program and request a modification if needed. So it gives them the ability to see how their program is working and make the adjustments as needed later down the road. So what is the modern approach? I'm sure you all have been waiting to hear, and we're excited to tell you. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the traditional approach to applying for DCM. That's, as many of you are familiar, that is planning for the full 24-month period of performance. That's looking at every possibility of what could happen in that full 24-month period. You know, just taking in every consideration, thinking of everything. It's a big burden to carry, and it's also something that takes a lot of time to really think through and apply for. On the right-hand side, the modern approach to applying is still applying for the full 24-month period of performance, but you're using the numbers that you know now, such as the number of destroyed homes or a percentage of that that you might gain from performing preliminary damage assessments or any other assessment, and you're building out a program to meet that need. The program would be built, it's a foundational program that can be scaled over time. So let's say you've hired staff to oversee this program. You're looking at a very small subset of case managers to start providing those services to the small population. As those case managers are working in the field and providing those services and getting trained, they're also able to help you evaluate your program, tell you what it's addressing, tell you if there are any gaps, and then over time, using their information, you can build a scalable program, request that modification, and build up your program to meet the needs of the survivors at hand. So we know that staffing resources at the beginning of a disaster are strained, and it's a force multiplier for DCM to provide those services. So as you're moving forward and addressing those unmet needs, those needs evolve, so does the program. So the modern approach really helps you start small and build a scalable program so that you're able to meet the needs of your survivors. So what's the population to serve? There's a couple of considerations for using the modern approach. So we've outlined them here. The first being the population to serve. So typically you might wait for that FEMA registration period to end in the traditional approach before and using those the registration numbers to apply for your program. In the modern approach, we're saying don't wait for that registration to end. Use the population you know now that will likely need those longer term services. So again, it might be the number of destroyed homes. It might be a percentage of that. It's a number based on an assessment that you've performed. This approach really encourages you not to get scope creep. That delays your progress and your services. It takes longer to apply. We really want to focus on that small population and the numbers that you know immediately, and focusing on that. The second element is the implementation and resources. So there we're saying, keep those costs simple and succinct. What you need, just put what you need for a baseline program, something that's scalable, something you can easily modify over time if needed. And again, we mentioned here, if you've implemented the program and you've trained those staff, they're able to help you in reporting what support might be needed to modify that program. Do you need additional staff? Do you need additional equipment? Do you need additional travel? They can help you write that justification for the modification, and you can build your program to meet the needs as the program evolves over that 24-month period of performance. And then finally, that service provider. We mentioned it earlier. We mention it probably every time you hear from us, but we can't say it enough to sub-award or to contract with a service provider that is experienced in disaster case management. They should have those relationships within the community. It should have those connections to the organizations with resources. And they should mirror the population they serve so they can really support the survivors throughout this program. Next slide. So I went through that very quickly. However, we did provide some headquarters contacts here for you all, but we support the regional counterparts in supporting you. So if you have any questions, you're free, please reach out to your regional counterparts. And we've also provided our email addresses here to help or support in any way we can.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we do have a few questions in the Q&A. So I will just start with the first question that came in. And that is, under the DCM program area, the IAPPG outlines a IDCM grant, but that doesn't seem to have been available since last summer.
Sure. So I'll jump in and then I'll pass it to Jennifer Voorhees, who may have something additional to add. We haven't had an immediate disaster case management grant, but there is a FEMA administered DCM program that's been implemented in the past. We've been working on ensuring some privacy protections are in place for that program. And so we're hopeful to have that added soon, cleared soon, and adding some flexibilities to the program to better address those individual disasters. The program is currently on hold, but we are working diligently to get it back online, and we'll keep everyone posted as it becomes available again.
Thanks, Rebecca. And it doesn't seem like Jennifer has anything to add on this question, so we'll move along. The next question is, does the application need to be done by the state and not the municipality?
So typically, again, I'll jump in, and Jennifer, please feel free to add anything. The state would be the state, tribe, or territory is typically the one that does apply for disaster case management, though they can work with the municipality and support and gain their support in filling out that application.
Great, thanks again, Rebecca. Moving on to the next question. What platform or software do you use to manage the application and grant process?
So we currently are working on working to get a platform to help us manage it. Right now, we do a lot of it internally as a team with both the region and the field. Jennifer, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I'm glad that someone brought this up. We are looking at a system that will help streamline the process and will be a centralized location to apply and for FEMA folks to review. You know, we are a little antiquated in the processing of applications, and those of you that have applied have felt that. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's a path to get there, so hang in there with us.
Thanks to you both. Next question is a little long, so I'm gonna take a little bit of time. The requirement of local resources and prior experience in identifying or securing DCM providers hasn't seemed to have been enforced in the past year in New York, Louisiana, and other areas where DCMPs were approved. How does each FEMA region ensure that the state emergency management follow these guidelines?
I'll take this one. So again, a really good question in regards to making sure that that states, tribes, and territories look to those relationships that you know, the partners that are experienced in providing disaster case management services, as mentioned, and as Rebecca mentioned too, that have those connections to the local community already pre-established before the disaster happens. It's so important. We all know that. So what we are making sure to include in the policy is more language on that. And then we're also developing some language for training. So I think that you'll see in the new updates to the individual assistance program and policy guide that are coming up, that you'll like what you see in there. But in the meantime, we're having conversations like this with our state, tribes, and territories that receive a disaster declaration, as well as conversations with our regional partners.
Thanks, Jennifer. And moving on to the next question. LTRCs are not forming in that timeline since COVID in 2020, and funding is becoming more scarce. It is now more accurate at the 9 to 12 months post-declaration, if at all. Hurricane Ida in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, there was little to no LTRC formation. So I think that's just for awareness. I'm not sure if there was a question in there. So if that person would like to clarify that, be happy to answer that. And then someone suggested a modern approach to hire case managers and provide, especially for the states that don't understand that concept, to hire case managers that understand that DCM concept. And then a few more. What is the difference between this program and the one that is suspended?
Sure. So this program is the federal award program. So this is awarded, it's applied for and awarded to states, tribes, and territories. The program that is suspended is the FEMA administered disaster case management. So that's FEMA provided. It was formerly called immediate disaster case management. So that's the program that FEMA oversees and manages, not the one that the state, tribe, or territory oversees and manages.
Thanks, Rebecca. And we have one more question at the moment, and that is, who would be the right point of contact to reach out to regarding a platform software solution? And what is the timeline for this project?
Jennifer, I might defer to you for that response.
Sure. So what I'm taking from this question is in regards to an entity that's interested in applying for the disaster case management grant. How would you find out if your software solution would be able to be used for disaster case management? That's what I believe is being asked. And you know, please reach out to your regional counterparts, as well as you can reach out up here. I know that we've been working on some system solutions, and that includes the sharing of privacy data. And that's a piece of that. So, in a region, you would reach out to your regional counterparts. Otherwise, you can always reach out to headquarters. And Jennifer, I think you provided an email address also so that we can assist if you don't know who your regional counterparts are.
Thanks, Jennifer. We do have a few more that popped in, so I'll keep reading. Is there any consideration of a policy change prohibiting a for-profit corporation, particularly one outside of the state, being awarded a DCMP contract?
Jennifer, could you repeat that one, please?
Yep. Is there any consideration of a policy change prohibiting a for-profit corporation, particularly one outside the state awarded, being awarded a DCMP contract?
We've had some conversations about experienced disaster case management providers, and that's been the focus. And when we do look at changing policy and updating that, there's going to be opportunities for public comment and feedback on that, not just with the policy elements, but also with the forms that we're sending out that Rebecca mentioned that are to streamline the process. Those are opportunities to provide your feedback. As far as restricting them, that's a conversation that we need to have with legal and also weigh those risks and benefits.
Thanks, Jennifer. The next question is, what should we expect from FEMA with regard to building capacity to establish LTRGs in areas that they don't or haven't existed? And when would that support be available?
Jennifer, I think that's one of the ones that we need to put on the parking lot. Love to hear from our voluntary agency partners and some other partners on that one.
Yep, absolutely. We will take that to note and get back to the individual and also put it in the notes as well. So thank you for that. And last question as of now, unless anyone asks further questions, is the IDCM was also a direct grant to North Carolina in their last hurricane, rather than being FEMA administered. Will that be available again to states in advance of the full DCMP grant applications?
Go ahead, Jennifer.
All right, so Rebecca and I both worked on that in North Carolina, so we unmuted at the same time. So in North Carolina, I believe that was during Florence that this is mentioning, so the modern approach was something that we looked at back then, and we looked at a shorter term timeline. It wasn't immediate disaster case management. It was the same idea with the foundational program, but we also restricted the timeline. We found out after that the restricted timeline caused some problems with procurement specific to that, and then after experiencing some other programs with some other states, tribes, and territories too, we thought that was just too restrictive. So we're not looking at restricting the timeline. It's going to be based on the need for the entity that applies. And just know that was a disaster case management grant. Anything that would have been immediate disaster case management is FEMA administered. So it wasn't the state, tribe, or territory. It would be an entity on behalf of FEMA doing that. So this presentation has been about the grant. Good question.
Thanks, Jennifer. And that, it looks like that is the final question for disaster case management for the moment. So again, thank you, Jennifer and Rebecca, for the presentation. And I will turn it over to Emily to introduce our next speaker. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Jennifer and Rebecca. I am pleased to now introduce Brian Thompson to provide information on the individual and households applicant letter update. Brian, over to you.
Hi, as mentioned, my name is Brian Thompson. I'm the coordination unit chief in program management, which is part of the individual assistance division. So next slide. Our letters often are the most important piece of way of communicating with our applicants. And in addition to reviewing letters constantly and making revisions based on feedback, policy changes, we do overall comprehensive reviews on a schedule. We did one in 2017, 2019, and we're currently wrapping up a 2021 one. The comprehensive review includes things like policy changes, lessons learned from open disasters, a plain language focus that really tries to make things easier for the applicants to understand, equity factors, and we do conduct focus groups. Specifically, we want to hear what applicants have to say. So in 2021 review, we did focus groups that actually occurred in March of this year, 2022. We're really happy that based on all of the reviews that really go on through a very regimented review cycle that includes feedback from our senior leaders, that we're on target to implement our new letters in August of 2022. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we will have all our letters in our system. They'll be ready for use and applicants will start reading our new letters. And then our next review will occur in the cycle and it's scheduled to begin in 2022. Next slide, please. To really give you the revision highlights, we went through 55 different letters, and that's a whole letter. Our basic letters also consist of a template that has 319 letter inserts. And they're very specific to applicant decisions. They give specifics on the type of things that an applicant may or may not be eligible for. And what we found through our working groups was that we needed to improve the language to explain our requirements for completing a small business administration loan. We also created a new appeal document request letter. And this really provides information to survivors about the types of documents they should provide. Another thing is we found that our letters weren't consistent with a closing. It sounds pretty simple, but across our letters, we had different ways of ending our letters. And now we have changed that where every letter has a very consistent ending and explanation to the applicant about next steps. We found that special flood hazard area information, at some point in our various reviews, we felt that it was very needed in our eligibility letter template. So every applicant who received an eligibility letter was receiving information about special flood hazard areas. And it just didn't make sense to have that in there in a disaster that perhaps only focused as a cause of damage with fire. So we've removed that special flood hazard area information. We've improved our flood information. Many of our survivors did not have a good grasp of what flood insurance information was. We know we have a lot of information that's provided once someone receives, let's say, a group flood insurance policy, but they didn't really have it if they've never been in a disaster, any information about flood insurance. So we've improved that to make it clearer to the applicants. And then a big customer service type approach was to look at our tone. We've softened our tone to really not be so harsh in how we say you're just not eligible, to a more customer service approach to say you're not approved at this time type language. And another thing that when we look at our systems of record and how we process applicants, our system currently cannot handle multiple languages. We only have Spanish and English in there and can produce those type of letters. So in every letter, we've added a section that highlights things like Russian and Korean. We may not be able to produce a letter in those languages yet, but we've added a section to each letter that says, and we picked actually the most common, our RAD partners found that Russian, Vietnamese, and I think Korean were the top 5. And we've added a section that says, if you have a need for these languages to be translated, caller 800 number, and it gives some information about how to get those letters in those languages or correspondence in those languages. Next slide, please. So again, survivor focus groups were a big part, and they remain a big part of how we get feedback on our communication. So we chose two California disasters, a Michigan disaster, and Louisiana. Each one of them was actually a different type of disaster. So we had fire, we had flood, hurricane, to really get a wide range of feedback from applicants. The sessions did occur in February and March, and unfortunately, the downside of these was that we only had an 18% participation. And there was actually several hundred applicants who we reached out to, had confirmation on participating, but in the end, only 18% were actually at these sessions. So that was a little bit of a downside to all of this, but we did make some great revisions based on what they provided to us. So our cover letter now has strengthened information about the SBA loan status. We've made clarifications about that entire process in our cover letter, as well as we've updated the determination letter appeal section. It gives a little bit deeper information about the necessary documents within a 60-day appeal period. We've also updated our ineligible letter inserts to provide examples of uninsured losses. That was a very key point that folks did not really understand uninsured losses versus insured losses. So we've strengthened that to give a better understanding. And also we found that folks felt that the citations about specific laws that governed our program were very confusing. So in coordination with OCC, we've replaced that to simplify the letters with by law as a simple statement. And that's consistent with plain language. Next slide, please. We've also added examples of acceptable ownership verification. There's historically been a very big issue with homes that have just transitioned from a sibling to a sibling or a parent to a child. So we've strengthened that based on some of our equity initiatives with things like heirship issues. So, you know, we really are trying to get a better attempt at ownership verification to help the applicants. We've clarified the information in our cover letter again with, even though we've removed special flood hazard area information from our letter template, we strengthened the information in our cover letter that goes out to every applicant, as well as group flood insurance policies. We have revised assistance type definitions. We found in conversations with the applicants that we know these definitions about our assistance well, but the applicants may not use those same terms about additional living expenses, as an example. So we've tried to revise those definitions to be better understanding to the American public. One big inclusion now is authorization for release of information. We have in our cover letter a link that a person can go and actually get it themselves. But now in every letter that's a determination letter to our survivors, you actually will have the authorization for release. And by doing that, we're giving them the service of not having to publish it themselves. They may be in a shelter situation or somewhere where they cannot actually print it themselves from that link. So it's being provided. And also it gives us now some consistency with that release, where applicants are not just writing different things, or, you know, a field office may produce a template. We have an official authorization for them to fill out. And we went through, and it was really interesting, I have to say it like that, that we updated certain phrases. Things like financial assistance were not perceived as, you know, plain language terms are very understandable, but when we put the term money, applicants were very acceptable to that as a explanation for our assistance. Slide, please. And that's it. Again, it's been a very big undertaking, obviously, coordinating with applicants to get them to participate, as well as all the various feedback we received from regional offices. And especially during IDA, we had a lot of interaction with congressional entities who gave us really good feedback in the process. That's it.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that presentation. We do have a few questions, so I will start with the first one, and that is, have there been any revisions or considered revisions to the process survivors must take to request extensions on rental assistance? We have found this to be exceptionally burdensome process for the survivor as they look to obtain more permanent housing among numerous other steps they are undertaking for their recovery.
Our continued rental assistance letters have been revised. That is one area that we've also focused on, the forms itself, and unfortunately, that's a part of an OMB approved form. So that is one piece that we can change the letter text at this point. But to make revisions to some of that letter, we have to go through the OMB process. So you will see some revisions on explaining how to apply, how to deal with submitting documents, but the overall letter itself, the form that goes with it, still has to go through that OMB process.
Thank you. Our next question is it clear on the new letter who is required to maintain flood insurance after receiving federal money for flood recovery? I have gotten conflicting answers from FEMA versus SBA about the flood zone. FEMA said only properties in a special flood hazard area have to. SBA said firm zone doesn't matter if you have federal money for flood or for flooding, the property must maintain flood insurance.
We have improved some of the language in there to give a little bit more detail to the applicants, but we also have been working with our partners in mitigation and trying to strengthen the letters and the explanations about group flood insurance that goes out to applicants once they are on a certificate. A lot of that information that you've actually asked about is really driven by the mitigation folks. So as much as our program can give you the basic information about it, the really deep specifics that go into like LOMAs and things like that are things that we would rather let the mitigation folks handle in their publications.
Thanks, Brian. And I know that a previous webinar did cover flood insurance, so that's another opportunity to learn a little bit more if you haven't accessed that webinar. But we'll move on from there. And has there been any discussions with the requirement that an applicant must sign an appeal letter? We have found that this requirement causes unnecessary delays in processing and providing assistance.
I'd have to divert that to our policy folks. I know there's some on there, so we'll get into that. I guess I said, Jennifer, you said earlier we'd publish follow-up questions.
Yes. So all of the questions that are asked, we will publish in the after action report. And moving on to the next question, a strike team, and strike was in quotes, was put together during the Detroit flood to go out and assist the elderly and disabled applicants. Many times we were approached by residents who had difficulties regarding the FEMA letters, reading them or writing appeals. Has there been any more thought given to assist these applicants? I know you mentioned the equity efforts, so.
Yeah, I mean, our letters we can only do so much with our letters, but definitely you can get things like larger print. There are some through different requests that you can do, some folks who can do the translation into audio. But as far as actually sitting down with applicants, that would actually occur outside of our letters. Like I know that there are some folks to deal with, and unfortunately, I'm drawing a blank on the group that goes out, but there are assistants that's available to sit down and meet with applicants to help them go through things.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I believe we have one more question at the moment, and that is, if communication with survivors continues to be by letter, highlighting the need for translation to additional languages, how can the translation process be sped up or benefit from additional resources?
That's a great question. We are currently building requirements for our new system. And that's the languages are something that we've really brought to the top as something that needs to be a consideration. I think at one point we decided that there was 12 letters. Working with our folks in the access and functional needs folks and our equal rights folks, we had identified 12 letters that are 12 languages that we want to be part of our process. And unfortunately, our current system doesn't do that. And that's why we've added that little block to each letter that says, call our helpline, use our language services. But until we can build a new system, we really do not have a means right now to provide in writing in various languages other than English and Spanish.
Thanks, Brian. And we did have a comment about the putting some of the language into the federal requirement for flood insurance. So we'll take that one for response in the after action report. There's also a question about the participants of the working group, the survivor participants. So we'll also take that for action. Just want to let everyone know that as well. And there is a question asking, can we see a draft of the new letter?
Unfortunately, we're not publishing the drafts publicly until they actually are final letters. Once they are final, they will go into a repository that's available through FEMA.gov. So some point in August, I would say we'll publish that out to the regional offices, and that can be communicated onto our partners that the repository has been updated with all the new stuff. The reason we really don't want to put the drafts out there just yet is they are consistently changing. And we are going through some of that final review with our senior leadership and just putting the final touches on them, and really wouldn't want to put those out there until they are final.
Thanks, Brian. And that was going to be my follow-up question. If you knew a time frame, like
August,
not that you have a crystal ball, but
August is our target. We are very much in line with getting them into production in NEMIS in August. So they're coming.
Very good. And one of the participants did say that she is really happy about the letter revision. So I believe that's a good place to end, as I do not see any further questions. And again, appreciate your presentation and participation in this IA virtual symposium. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
And we're going to move on to the program updates, IA program updates. And what this consists of is there were a few questions that we received prior to the webinar. When individuals registered, you are all able to ask questions at that time. So we have two questions that we'd like to highlight. And Mark Tinsman will be our first presenter on the question. And that question is, excuse me for a moment while I pull it up. And the question for Mark is, can you give an overview of the latest FEMA non-congregate policy? So we invite Mark to respond to that question at this time.
Let me just get a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's good to see you. Okay, the current policy, and this was done via memo that was issued on June 23rd. I'm sorry, June 28th, 2022. And what this does is it shifts us away from the interim non-congregate sheltering policy for all but the COVID declarations. They're still exactly under the same guidance they've been in since the beginning of COVID. Shifted us back towards the position in the PA program and policy guide, otherwise known as the Papa G. We're currently on version 4 of that document, and it has about 2.5 pages of information regarding non-congregate sheltering. And so we've shifted back to that. However, we are continuing some of the flexibilities, which is why you need to look at both the Papa G and the memo to get exactly where we stand with our policy today. And some of those, just to give you quick highlights, some of the flexibilities, continuing that jurisdictions can implement non-congregate sheltering without seeking prior approval. It includes a notification requirement so that within 5 days of doing that, you need to let FEMA know that you're doing it so that we have an understanding of the activities going on, because there will be, we want to make sure that the regions are communicating with the PA recipient and the PA applicants to make sure folks understand we're operating under this new interim policy. This also includes a caveat that it does not include recreational vehicles as non-congregate sheltering. If a jurisdiction wants to do that, we have a couple who are doing it now. They need to make a specific and a separate request, and that will require incident-specific guidance to be issued to guide those operations. The other things that are in here, time extensions continue to be delegated to the regional administrators. However, that is now limited to the first 6 months post-declaration, which is aligned to the time frame for emergency work. Sheltering is a form of emergency work that are covered in the 44 CFR regulations that apply to public assistance. After that time, beyond 6 months from the date of declaration, if non-congregate sheltering is still necessary, the same kind of a request with the same documentation requirements would be submitted to FEMA headquarters, and it will be reviewed and approved at headquarters. The deciding official there will be the assistant administrator for recovery. And those are really the primary changes. We are still, we communicated that while we still have a suspension on FEMA's ability to collect specific information about the people being sheltered, there is an expectation that the jurisdictions will use the data, it's identified in the memo, to manage the population. And what that means is, so you have an initial 30 days to operate non-congregate sheltering when you start. 3 weeks in, we still need more sheltering. You need to submit a memo to the regional administrator asking for an additional time extension beyond the initial 30 days. And in order to make sure that what you're doing is aligned with the eligible work requirements for public assistance, you want to look at the people you're sheltering, make sure they line up with the criteria that are listed in the memo, and that their home is still not habitable, because once a disaster survivor's home is habitable, they no longer have a need for sheltering. And those are really the primary changes. We're continuing quite a bit of the flexibility that has been in place since June of 2020 when the interim policy was issued. But we're moving back to a position where we are approaching getting back to sheltering as it's been described in our primary policy document, the Papa G. I will tell you that we think that the approach we have here, at some point, we do intend to reinstate the need to ask for pre-approval before conducting sheltering activities. And that flexibility was put in place because there were exigent circumstances around COVID. So we know that we're not quite out of COVID. We haven't put that back in place, but at some point in the future, we will go back to that more traditional approach for non-congregate sheltering. And there'll be some changes around the data-informed process that we think that this was an excellent approach. We've learned some things that worked very well during the past 2 years, and we intend to incorporate some of that into the future policy for PA. That's it.
Thanks, Mark. I don't see any questions, so you have covered that overview very well. I know that we have put the policy information and links in the chat for those, so that is available to everyone. And with that, appreciate your time, and we will move on to our next question. Thanks again. And I'd like to introduce Cindy Atkins, who will talk about TSA. And the question regarding TSA is, what if any programs are under development for housing and sheltering beyond short-term TSA?
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. First, I want to thank Mark for that overview. TSA is also a form of non-congregate sheltering under the same authority that we use for public assistance non-congregate sheltering. The difference is it is under our individual assistance program, and it is managed by FEMA. And sometimes we think TSA is the easy button, but we know that there are other challenges associated with this. So quick highlight of a couple of things that we have in the works in the IAPPG. There'll be a more robust component of what TSA is. It has a process for what the state request package needs to contain, how eligibility is determined, because that is different than public assistance NCS, and how the progression of TSA, if TSA is to continue, what that continued eligibility looks like. TSA relies on individuals and households housing components as it serves as a short-term emergency sheltering as folks transition to other housing options, things like receiving rental assistance, completing their home repairs so that they can return home, or having an inspection and finding out that their home is safe to occupy. So one of the other components that we recently implemented in 2021, and we have used it twice, and it is showing some promise, is that the state can request specifically geographic areas where they would like hotels to be located. So, we can do this by a state, by multiple states, or as the disaster progresses, we can even go down to counties. So that's something you may be seeing to help manage the population and target where one, hotels may more likely be available, and then also to coordinate the wraparound services. TSA is simply a hotel room, so working geofencing helps us target where we might need additional wraparound services. So that's
Cindy?
some of the, yeah, I'm sorry, did somebody?
Yes, sorry,
Yes.
this is Jennifer. I apologize for the interruption, but we did have a question come in as simply as, could you go back and explain what TSA is? So transitional sheltering assistance, but just a little bit of the concept of it, people were asking if we could do that.
Sure.
Thanks.
TSA, as you mentioned, is transitional sheltering assistance. It is a form of sheltering. It primarily uses hotels and motels, and it provides a more private setting for individuals and households that are temporarily displaced. So as I mentioned, so we have a national contract with a vendor who sources rooms that are excess rooms. So you can imagine, it's not booking. Hotels agree to give FEMA rooms at the GSA rate or some percentage above the GSA rate that the state may request. And these are excess rooms, and individuals can go to this website, find an available room and they can check in. It's intended to be emergency sheltering under the same emergency protective measures that we mentioned earlier. So it's a form of non-congregate sheltering, and it is managed by FEMA. So a more robust description will be in the IAPPG, but if you have any questions, reach out to regional coordination and or your regional counterparts, because they are able to answer any questions. And we're happy to have more specific one-on-one conversations with our regional partners, and any state that is interested, just reach out to your regional POC and we're happy to discuss that. One of the challenges in using hotels and motels is that they're not always in the area where we need them most often to be. So we work with the private sector, we work with responder lodging, we work with like utility companies and things, because at the time of an event, we're all competing for the same resources. And so we try to communicate where we would like to place survivors so that they don't have to continually move and or go long distances. And that's where the challenge is. They're not always conveniently located, and it may require significant coordination in terms of transportation and other supports. And so to that end, we are looking at other forms of expanding what types of facilities or what types of opportunities we have. We have used dorms before, dormitories. There might be summer camps. We've used summer camps, and then we've used other facilities like that that still allow for a safe, more private setting for families to shelter in. As the disaster stabilizes and as infrastructure returns, those folks that maybe had evacuated under a mandatory evacuation order or even under self-evacuation, as we begin to find out that folks are able to return to the disaster area to have an inspection to see if their home is safe to occupy, then we begin transitioning folks out of TSA. So generally it's 30 days from when the disaster is declared and TSA is activated, that we take that time to analyze the situation on the ground, hopefully help folks get registered for FEMA assistance so they can go beyond sheltering with temporary housing support in the form of rental assistance or inspections where they can return home. So to the question that was asked, what are we doing? We're working with vendors to see what other options are available. How can we identify maybe unique opportunities in a specific geographic area that's been impacted by a disaster, and work with our lodging contractor to see if that's a viable resource that we can use for individualized sheltering. We've looked at things like flotels and sleeping cars, and just about anything we're willing to look at and see if it's a viable option in certain situations. So that's generally high-level overview. Happy to answer any other questions.
Thanks, Cindy. We do have a few questions. I know you just spoke to the cruise ships. There was a question regarding cruise ships under TSA. So you spoke a little bit about that. Want to go to a question. Post Harvey, there was a change in FEMA IA policy that implemented a 2-week delay before TSA would be approved if requested by the state. Is this still the policy?
So it's generally, and depending, it's situation specific, but the intent of that is to allow congregate sheltering to stabilize and peak so that we have a better idea of what the remaining displaced population is. Not everyone goes from congregate sheltering to TSA onto temporary housing and then longer term housing and then permanent house. It's not exactly like that, but it is helpful to allow the congregate sheltering to stabilize and peak so we can better meet the needs of those survivors that have no other option. So we've done it immediately. I think you've seen some of that. We've also done it, 4 to 8 days post declaration, and it really just depends on the situation and the immediate need at the time. But generally, there is a pause to allow that sheltering population to stabilize.
Thanks, Cindy. Our next question is, does the TSA come with case management?
It does not. Oftentimes, what needs to happen right up front, TSA is often either ending or has ended by the time disaster case management comes online. And so we've worked, Jennifer and Rebecca, I recall in North Carolina, we still were able to connect folks with support services to help them navigate the process, because it can be overwhelming. And so working with our voluntary agency partners and working with our community services, human services component, we try to identify resources to help individuals navigate that process. But it does not come with TSA. I mentioned a little bit earlier, TSA is literally a hotel room, and we have to work with local resources and other state and federal resources to support those components that do not come with TSA.
Great, thanks, Cindy. And one more question. Can families stay with other families or members or friends and then get an invoice from them at the GSA rate to seek reimbursement?
That is not currently possible because TSA goes directly to the hotel through our procurement process. So it's not possible for us to do something like that at this time.
Thanks for that response. And I believe that is all the TSA questions. So appreciate your participation today. Thanks again, Cindy.
Thanks, Jennifer.
And actually, there is one more. So Cindy, if you're still on, a question just came in. And will FEMA share a list of people serviced by TSA to the SLTT?
So that nifty, handy document that you put in the chat at the beginning, where it talks about what needs to be in place for data sharing, we certainly will share that data if we have the proper documentation in place. I know we've been working hard on what an ISA template looks like and those types of things. We've already pre-identified the fields that are most requested and most helpful when trying to support TSA survivors. So we most definitely will do that, and we're happy to work to get that documentation in place so that we can share that information.
Thanks, Cindy. Appreciate that input again. And I, at this point, do not believe that there are any more TSA questions. So we will move on. And unfortunately, Zach Usher, who was supposed to provide closing remarks, is detained at another important commitment. So I will just close this out by saying that a pop-up window you'll see shortly with some questions with regards to feedback. We encourage you to provide your feedback, along with a question in the chat to ask. We have had 4 of these symposiums, i.e. virtual symposiums. We're looking forward to doing more, but also we're looking forward to doing more with your input. So if there are topics regarding individual assistance that you feel we should cover or cover more of or go more in depth with, we appreciate that feedback that you can provide. So with that, again, want to thank you for your participation today. And just wanted to say that our purpose for today's webinar was to really highlight the programs that will be integral as we are currently in and will continue to be in hurricane season. I also want to mention that the Office of Regional Field Coordination, in which I lead, we are always available to you, as well as our regional counterparts and headquarters programming. And feel free to email us at FEMA-HQ-regional-field-coordination@fema.dhs.gov. And as we've mentioned before, the link for this recording will be sent out once it is available, as well as being posted to FEMA.gov. But with that, I'd like to again thank you for your participation, and hopefully you will have a good day or good evening. And we look forward to seeing you the next time. Thanks again.